Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Cuddy, the Marilyn Toma Artistic Director of the Chicago Humanities Festival, and welcome to this program, The 99% Invisible City, a field guide to the hidden world of everyday design. You can learn more about other upcoming programs at our website, chicagohumanities.org. You can also help support them by making a one-time donation or becoming a member. And while there, you can also learn about how we make our programs more accessible. All of our digital events have closed captioning, which can be activated through YouTube. Thank you so much to Art Captioner today. And thanks also to the Bank of America. All of this week's programs are presented with their support. So I first met Roman Mars while we were both working at WBEZ, the NPR affiliate in Chicago. And thinking about this book and Roman's work, you know, Chicagoans we're such nerds about our city. We love every bit of its lore, its history, its architecture, and of course, its design. And it's clear that Chicago was an inspiration, not just for this book, but the 99% Invisible project more generally. If you haven't seen Roman's TED Talk on the genius of the Chicago flag, you should definitely check it out. Today, Roman will be in conversation with his co-conspirator and co-author, Kurt Kohlstedt, and their conversation will be moderated by the fabulous author and video creator, Hank Green. So please join me in welcoming Hank Green, Kurt Kohlstedt, and Roman Mars.
Hello and welcome. It is a pleasure to be here. I'm Hank Green, and Roman and Kurt are here with me. It's really cool to be a part of the Chicago Humanities Festival, which is not something that I had on my schedule for this year. But no one knows what's happening this year. It's a joy to be talking to these two very smart people who know lots of things about our world. I want to start with a question that was inspired by the first conversation you guys had on your book launch day, where you had an event in San Francisco, and there was a sizzle reel before the event. And the last thing that was said on the sizzle reel was said by some, I don't even remember who it was, some very important person. And they said, San Francisco is the only city in the world that's magical. Roman and Kurt, is San Francisco the only city in the world that's magical?
No,
I almost asked, I almost like went into the chat and I was like, so you guys, is it the only, like this Bay Area Titan says it's the only city in the world that's magical, is it?
No, I would say not at all. There's lots of places that are magical. It's beautiful downtown Oakland, California is magical. Chicago is magical. New York is magical. DC is magical. I think cities in general are magical. This is like a book to the testament of cities being magical all around the world, for sure.
Yeah,
it's so funny.
They very are. Your book made me think a lot of things, but the first thing that I wanted to talk about is appreciation. I think that in general, we don't have enough of it going around in society right now. We're not good at appreciating our own labor. We're not good at appreciating the work of other people, the ingenuity that's around us. And the process of noticing that you are asking us to do with this book, and that you do in your work, I think is like, to me, it is a first step on the path to doing the work of appreciation. How do you get into the mind frame of always noticing?
Well, you know, it is an active act, I guess is the first thing. Is like, it isn't natural to me. And I've really trained myself through the course of doing this show to notice and enjoy these things, especially when they're annoying. Like you know, like I love roads and infrastructure and bridges, and just like everyone else, when I run across them being built, I get pretty annoyed, and I have to sort of check myself and and realize like, oh, these are these things that I talk about and love, so I should chill the hell out if I'm like being delayed by them. I should like have a moment where I enjoy them. And so that's one part of the noticing. The other part is like the noticing is self-rewarding. Like if you go out looking for stories in the world and you find ways to enjoy them and process them, you will enjoy the world more. Like it's a positive feedback loop. And that's one of the things that I've learned over the course of the show.
And I would just say too about the book specifically, it's like the first two chapters are about things that are conspicuous and things that are inconspicuous. And those sound like polar opposites, but those are both like categories of things you might not notice. Like a stoplight is something you kind of don't notice because you see it everywhere. And then there are things you don't notice because they're camouflaged or small. And so like over the arc of the book, like those chapters set you up for the rest of the book, but they also are kind of a primer in how to notice things in a city.
Yeah, I really do think that it is that. I mean, it's funny because field guides are supposed to be about the natural world. Like that's it's a field, right? Like, and I, you know, I do deeply appreciate the natural world, and I love to spend time noticing, you know, the interactions between different ecosystems, like just how plants interact with each other, how animals interact with each other and with plants and with ecosystems. Like that's one of my chief loves. And to be sort of told that it's okay to do that with the built environment, like it's almost like I need to be told, because like I might have this sort of like bias against it because it is so mechanical and it is so functional and it is so like, you know, paved paradise kind of situation. And to be given the permission is very, I think is important.
I
You looked
agree.
like you were going to say something, Roman, so I wanted to stop talking.
Yeah, no, I think I had to give myself permission too. And I do think you can kind of go overboard with like, you know, loving everything, you know, like, but I do think that for the most part, what I do enjoy about it is that, you know, the reason why it's invisible and unnoticed is because it's because it works well. And something working well is worth paying attention to too. Like we tend to notice the design that breaks, we tend to notice the design that fails. And it is nice to notice the design that works and recognize that, oh, it was really an act of genius for me to never notice this thing. And those little embedded moments, you know, of genius, and realize that the whole city has been designed this way. And I, for the most part, passed through it without being stopped, without noticing it, is something that is like, it really just shows how much we're actually being taken care of by other people that we don't notice. And I like that feeling of being taken care of by designers.
Yeah, and I would just say that, you know, a lot of the things that we cover in the show and in the book are these things that I just assume they've been around forever until I learned they've only been around since the 70s and I was born in 1980. So, you know, you grow up with these things, right? Like curb cuts and ambulances, and you just think, well, that's been a thing forever.
Yeah.
So I'm losing you a little bit, Hank.
Yeah, he's
and
frozen.
yet, somebody had to think of that. Are you losing me? Oh, well, I can hear y'all just fine.
Well, that's good.
Okay, now you're caught up. You're frozen.
I'll just keep moving.
Keep going.
Okay, great.
We got it. You're just frozen.
So,
with a little bit of a frown.
We were discussing a little bit that I'll just try to keep a smile on the whole time in case I freeze again.
Yeah.
So I also have big questions about engineering versus design. Like when I first started listening to 99% Invisible, it was like, this is a show about design, but then it would be not a show about design. It would be very clearly about something that I don't consider design, but that maybe it turns out that it is. So where do you define the space between engineering and design and art and design?
Between engineering and design and art and design, those are tougher. I will tell you that the broader definition of design to me is basically anything that a human came up with is designed object. And so to me, the reason why I chose it as a subject or as a beat for the show was that it was a way to focus attention and use it as a lens to explore the world in general and explore humans in general. But had enough, you know, like, so it was broad enough to do whatever I wanted to, but just narrow enough, just enough to have it not be about everything. And so to me, that's what, you know, design is whatever humans are. But like, maybe Kurt, do you have a sense of like the difference between like engineering and design and how we define it?
I definitely have a take on that. And it's informed by the fact that, you know, I studied architecture, and one of the things I came to learn while studying architecture was that architects often get the credit for like designing the building. But in a lot of cases, it's like the architect comes up with a general idea, and then the engineer has to actually design how this thing's going to work. And so a lot of the best or most innovative buildings in the world are like products of like the engineering drove the design of that structure. And so, yeah, sure, the architect had an artistic idea, a vision of how people would move through the spaces, but actually executing the thing is very much like they're very intertwined as far as I'm concerned. So engineering sometimes provides the kind of framework for design, the limitations within which all designs have to operate.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's a collaboration. And firms like Arup come to mind that are just like, they're behind the scenes of so many structures that you think, oh, well, that architecture firm designed it. And yeah, they did, but so did these engineers, right? Like it's a much bigger process and project than just, you know, one famous person who kind of gets associated with it.
Mm-hmm. Right. I mean, yeah, I guess sorry if there's a substantial lag between when you stop talking and when I start talking. There was before, I don't know if it's still there. But I've always had a sense that like design is art that has a function, and like and so like there's always this sense that like everything is really art. Like there isn't a thing that isn't art, and so like that. Like, where is the line between what is engineering and what is design is like, well, as long as there's art there. And it's like, you've just convinced me a little bit that there's always art there. I have a question I like to ask everybody, which because I need to know what's making you happy right now?
What is making me happy right now? It's tough. Do you have a
challenge coin?
Challenge
like,
coin's making you happy?
This challenge coin gives me comfort.
I mean, I'm twiddling mine right now.
I
too.
know, I do. I just do.
But it's you know, it's weird. I mean, I do find, like, as I've been talking about the book and talking about the idea of using it to appreciate where we are and what we have, it has been rubbing off on me. You know, like I'm not just like preaching it to people and not experiencing it myself. Like I do feel that. And I do enjoy the conversations about it. And that's been so much of what, you know, has been dominating my life right now, that's been a big part of making me happy, I'm sure.
Yeah, and the sort of ironic thing to me is like, I would think that these kinds of live events would be stressful because I sometimes get stressed during live events. But I've actually found them to be some of the most relaxing and interesting times of this very busy week. So in a way, they're kind of like a break from everything else. So this conversation is making me happy.
Oh, that's nice. I agree. This conversation is also making me happy.
So why don't you're having a little bit of lag. Maybe you want to
yeah, I'm going to drop off and drop back in. Yeah.
Okay.
Sure.
Okay. I'll try that. See if it works.
So Roman.
So yeah, here we go. This is like, I did live radio for a long time. So when this type of stuff happens, I'm just like, I ease into it like a warm tub. So I'm like totally cool. Well, we should talk a little bit about Chicago, because Chicago is one of the main reasons why this show exists. Because I worked at WBEZ in Chicago for 3 years, and the Chicago Architecture Foundation, I think it's actually called the Chicago Architecture Center now, has a boat tour. And if you have from Chicago and you haven't been on it, then you are missing out, because it is the greatest thing in the world. Have you been on that boat tour, Kurt?
Yes, I have. And it's like on my like short, like people are like, what do I do in Chicago? It's on my short list. I'm like, well, go here, do this, and take the boat tour. Like it's definitely,
I think I've done it 5 times. I think there are parts of the tour that I could narrate along with the docent, and the docents are out of sight. They're so good. They're so good.
But even just seeing the city from an angle, it's like you've moved. You're used to seeing it at eye level from this one perspective, and just seeing it from a slightly different angle, even just the visual experience of it is just so powerful.
Yeah, and so this is something that I've had a discussion with Robert Smith, who was at Planet Money, a longtime NPR guy, And he came to Chicago, and I told him, you have to go, and it's life-changing. And he came back to me and he said, I think one of the reasons why Chicago is a better architecture town than New York, where he's from, is because there is that vantage point from the river in which you can see is so superior that like you don't have these narrow lanes of streets and avenues in New York that cuts off your ability to take in the architecture, but Chicago has all this expanse to take in the architecture. And that's why no matter what, the composition of the buildings are, it's a greater place to appreciate architecture because of the way it is. So this is my pandering to Chicago for the show.
I mean, I will say too, as an architecture nerd, it's like Chicago is a huge focus when you study architecture. Like
always,
huge, like probably the single, if you picked out one of the most studied buildings in architecture school, the top 10, like half of them are in Chicago.
Totally.
I mean, it was a pivotal place in terms of modernism and like transitioning from more decorative buildings to tall buildings. Like it's just got such a place in architectural built environment history.
Hey, Hank, you're moving and I can see your face again.
That's great. Who knows if this is going to hold up. I apologize for the state of Montana's internet.
No problem.
I think that when you arrive in Chicago as a tourist, which I have done, they just put you on a boat and they drive you down the river and they tell you about buildings. And I'm like, yes, thank you.
That should be the way it goes. For sure.
That was my experience. My brother lived there for a while, so I have been. One story of the built world in the book is about one of the greatest engineering feats of all time, which seems deeply impossible, turning the Chicago River around and having it so that the poop goes down to the neighboring cities instead of to the place where they take the water out of the lake. I don't actually understand, like even having read it, even having heard the story a number of times now, it doesn't seem possible. I guess it's very flat there.
Well, and there's something in, so we did this story, or I shouldn't say we did. This story was told in a form before I even joined 99% Invisible, like the reversal of the Chicago River. But there have been updates since then, and it turns out the reversing might not have worked. Like the river has been re-reversing itself a little bit recently, and there's some question about whether like this fix that was done is going to be something that sticks.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, well, it does not seem to me like it would be something that would be permanent. Very few human endeavors are.
Especially when you're trying to turn a river, which seems, to me, I don't quite get it either. It's the principle of it is like you just dig a deeper hole on one side than the other, and it just goes downhill.
Starts to go down.
But when Dan Weissman, who's a Chicago journalist, like he's the one who reported that story for us way back when. And still it's so amazing, and it is like the reason why it's so big is the problem of Chicago just sort of drowning in its own sewage was so great, and they tried all these different things, jacking up the building, putting intake valves like way out into Lake Michigan, all that sort of stuff, until finally they just had to move earth. They had to move like the flow of water, which seems like, which is the type of thing that like creates the Grand Canyon. Like it's the type of thing that is like an elemental force that they decide to harness. And it's one of those things that maybe if it was happening now, I would be like nervous or, upset by it, but like there's something about it happening 100 years ago that you're like, that's super charming. Look at those guys in those in their waistcoats,
just dynamiting things.
Digging.
It's great. It's great.
And so I don't know what it is about engineering feats where when it happens a long time ago, I'm like super into it. And when it's happening now, I'm like, you're destroying the earth, friend. You need to stop,
This is not the hubris of man. Exactly. It's like, hubris is quaint when it's 100 years ago. Now we've actually experienced the effects. We know better. Yeah, and I like that. So you referred to, there were two different problems they were solving, and the second one you referred to was the sewage, and you referred to it at one point as problem number 2. And I just wanted to know if that was a joke. Was that a joke?
It was a joke. It was written into the book. I can't.
Yeah, that is definitely
those things. Yeah.
I was
okay, because
intentional.
It's so
If juvenile.
Yes. In general, there aren't a ton of jokes in 99% Invisible, and you do not usually, you don't, like, Roman doesn't laugh during the parts of the show that are the show. He will laugh during the conversations afterwards sometimes,
Right.
but not that often. The first time I met you, Roman, someone made a joke and you laughed, and I was like, like when we were talking, I was like, wow, this is very surreal. It's the 99% Invisible voice coming out of a man. And then you laughed, and I was like, I feel like I've never heard that absolutely delightful chuckle. And that's more an observation. I'm not gonna like have you answer for that decision.
I think as we've been doing more and more Q&As with the staff, like when they tell me stories and stuff, there is a kind of like, the staff, I don't know, somebody mentioned that, like, I love to hear the velvety giggle of Roman Mars. And so Velvety Giggles has showed up. It's just like, oh, we're going to do an episode and Velvety Giggles is going to be there. And so, I can't help but be charmed by the staff. And I feel like I actually laugh a lot, like in terms of those things. But when we do a reported story, like there is a place and a time for it, for sure. But with the Q&A part of it, I almost can't help but do it. Like, I'm so charmed by it. And we do, I'll know we're kind of doing going into one of those Q&As, but I like to keep a lot of the information like separate from me so that I can react to it.
And sometimes, and sometimes we really do surprise him too. Like sometimes we'll just be don't actually, like I've got something written up, but don't read any of it. And I'm going to show you this thing and I want to get your reaction to it. And so often you're hearing his legit on the spot, like, oh my God, is that real?
Yeah. So this is a question that I have for you as a content creator. I don't know the answer to it, but I when you see it, what makes something fascinating? What, like, how do you, like, do you know what that is about the world when you're like, wow, that counts, that works?
I don't know for sure. I do know that when I was trying to figure out what the recipe for a 99% Invisible show was, it was that it had one story, like a kind of an individual story that was being told. It had one big idea, like a design lesson, and it had one takeaway fact. And the takeaway fact was not necessarily the thesis. It was just the thing that you remember. It's like the tweetable thing. And sometimes I can identify what that is going to be, and oftentimes I cannot. Like, I don't know what is the thing that people are going to write the tweet about.
And I will tell you, like, for example, the Chicago River, you would think reversing the Chicago River would be the takeaway fact. But my takeaway fact was Bubbly Creek, that there's a section of the Chicago River that bubbled up with methane bubbles because of all of the waste that was being put into it. And that stuck with me, like as much as the huge engineering feat.
My takeaway from that story was that 5% of Chicago died of a cholera outbreak, which is not a thing I knew and is a big deal.
Yeah.
Like that's 1 in every 20 people died. Yeah. Probably more if you lived in certain parts of the city and less in others. But what, like, so you guys have given us an opportunity to in this project, like, do a better job of imagining and seeing and like witnessing the history of a city in its like existing form, and like seeing the layers of history in a place. I think that's very important because it reminds me that like this is not a static thing that I live inside of, and I get caught up in that, and I get frustrated when things are changing in my city, and I need to not feel that way. How do we not feel that way?
Well, I think you kind of hit on it, is that if you, like most people, like enter into the world, we're solipsistic, narcissistic people, like in the best way. And so when we enter into the world, we think that's the way that things should be, like that is natural state of human brains, But like studying the things the way we do, or like that we explore in the book, lets you know that we're just on this moving train. It's always changing. There was so much that decisions that were made to get to where we are now. And when I think it gives you the tools, like knowing that history, knowing that evolution, gives you the tools to sort of take in when things change today. And we just had this event, this pandemic, which, caused a lot of, city changes kind of instantaneously in terms of how we space ourselves out and how we use roads. And I think it's an interesting time to be looking at the past, because I think the future is I think it's the most dynamic it has been for cities in a really long time.
Yeah, and I would say too that in the, especially towards the end of the book, the last chapter, we talk a lot about how individuals can not just look at cities, but also engage with them and respond to them, and maybe like add something to them or change them in ways that they want. So I think there's certain things that, like reversing a river, that only a giant municipality can do, but there are changes that individuals can make too that can then lead to bigger changes. So I hope that people come away with like a sense of empowerment about, their own cities and things that they see wrong, and maybe see a new way to fix or at least raise awareness about.
Yeah, and on that note, before we go to audience questions, I'm curious if you guys, with this perspective, have any thoughts about what might be different about cities in the future?
Well, I think that people are going to take a real close examination of public transit in a way that I'm kind of scared of, actually. Like the BART, ridership went down by about 90%. I don't know when you get more comfortable and makes that possible again. I wish I knew more what was going on with Chicago, because Chicago was a town that, I completely existed on public transit in Chicago. And so that one's weird, and the one thing I'm kind of curious about, we talk about this in the book, the invention of the elevator and the self-braking elevator that Otis invented really changed like which one is the most valuable floor in a building. Like for the longest time, the first floor was the most valuable floor. The rich people never wanted to walk upstairs, and so the fanciest floor was the first floor. And then the elevator a safe elevator came into being, and then they marketed the penthouse as the greatest floor of a building. And now, this one form of public transit that we probably don't consider public transit, but the elevator is like this tiny form of public transit that we share. It's a tiny box that you're going to sit next to someone, and they're usually less than 2 feet away. And if pandemics are regular part of our lives, or this one lasts a long time, will it make the elevator such an undesirable place that the top floor will be an undesirable place? And I'm really curious about that kind of thing.
And on the flip side, I mean, you mentioned that the devastating death toll from a pandemic in Chicago, and you look at that, you didn't know that it happened. I didn't know that it happened. Cities also bounce back, right? Like, they're resilient organisms. So I don't know, what the future holds, but I don't think that this is the death of cities or anything like that.
I don't think so either. I mean, I've been sort of intrigued by this too, this idea, like I haven't heard about the 18 and 19 flu epidemic. Like that is not part of the culture of the 20s when people talk about the roaring 20s and stuff like that. It seems like it's absolutely gone from the record at that point. And I hear about it now because it has this parallel to where we are now. But I think it's super possible that we'll get a couple years on the other side of this, and it'll just be gone from people's memories.
Yeah. And what I'd love to see in the meantime is just like, let's take this quiet time in cities where cities are not very busy. Let's invest in infrastructure. Let's do all these projects that are hard to do when everybody's driving around everywhere. Like, let's make use of this and just improve everything. It's kind of maybe too optimistic, but.
I was always, so I remember at one point in my youth playing SimCity 2000, as all of us probably did because we're nerds, and discovering that something like 25% of my city was roads. And like roads are a very invisible thing. You don't notice that they are there. You don't notice how many square feet they take up. But like walking across a road takes a while. They're big. Could we have a world with fewer roads? It seems like great space.
Yeah. and there have been lots of attempts to sort of reclaim some of that space. And I think there's been, because of the crisis, there's been more experimentation with roads and taking over roads than I think it has been in decades, honestly. And one of the things that's important to remember, and again, we talk about this, we talk about the show, we talk about in the book, is like roads were not invented to be a thing for cars to drive on. Roads were a conveyance for all kinds of constituencies. There's people and trolley cars and rail lines and horses, and people just like put up like they started vending in a hut, they were just like, like it was a weird place that had a lot fewer rules. And so, we gave over the car, to cars for a long time, and there is no reason why we can't take some of it back.
No, and the example I like is one of the examples I like is in Barcelona, and what they've done is they've converted sets of 3x3 blocks into basically a giant mega blocks. So they've just sort of eliminated people traversing up and down and across, like picture a tic-tac-toe board, and they just take 9 blocks and turn it into a super block. And it makes total sense, right? You just give more people more space to like walk around, and they can still wrap around these blocks, get whatever they need. And it's things like that where it's like, there can be a balance. There can be a better balance.
So Hank, I'm still seeing you frozen again now.
Do
you want to come back in and out, or just like I'm a little?
Oh, dang it!
Yeah, but if you start me with a question, we can go for it.
Yeah, I don't know if you can.
We can hear you.
I can hear you.
Yeah, if you can hear me right now, okay. Then this is a question from Elizabeth, who asks, have you ever noticed a change in a real life design after you did a show relating to the problem a design tries to solve? Have you either seen a thing get solved, or maybe it was already solved and you didn't know it yet? Oh.
Okay, so while Hank is away, I will let you know this thing. So that TED Talk that Cuddy mentioned, I call her Cuddy, we called her Cuddy back then at WBEZ, mentioned, it was this sort of call to arms and a little bit of a shaming session on all the bad city flags that existed in the world, because I thought all of them had the potential to be as great as Chicago's. I don't know if they can ever be quite as great as Chicago's, but they had the potential to be as great as Chicago's. And since that TED Talk has existed, over 200 municipalities have changed their flags as related to that talk. They always cite it. It's always embedded in some newspaper article. I always get tweeted about it. It is a real thing that brought an effect out in the world. Sometimes it's it's mostly a good effect. Occasionally people write me nasty things because they like the old flag. but for the most part, that was something that like I never thought that we would really change anything, but that one really had an effect out in the world.
I don't know that this has percolated fully through the system yet, but we've talked quite a bit about, you infected me with your obsession with W4-2 signs.
Yeah.
And after I started writing about it, I had somebody approach me from like the US Department of Transportation and like tell me that they wanted to talk to me more about it. And they never really followed up, but I kind of like in the back of my mind, I hope that is like moving its way slowly through like some federal bureaucracy, and they're I want to believe that they're rethinking that sign. And I've seen examples that look better. I don't know if they're exceptions or if there's like something new that's going to become the new standard. And if it changes, I will feel like we changed the world. It's a small thing, I know, but
it's an important sign.
It's an important sign. It's a merch sign. It's very important.
Hank, I see you again.
Hey.
Hello, I'm here. The terrible news is that did eliminate all of the questions that I had queued up in the chat. So luckily I have more of my own to ask you.
That's great. They can feed more in. Sure.
Sava's working on it. So how awful is it to design a book about design?
Oh, it's quite a burden.
A little bit of pressure. Yeah, to design it well.
It's really gorgeous. It is like the feel of it is very good. I love but it's also like just the book design is really wonderful. It's obviously was a ton of work and a ton of thought and like a ton of skill. So you guys found good people to work with.
And the secret is the good people to work with. So like Patrick Vale, the illustrator, was the first person that we connected with, and his work almost immediately seemed to fit what we wanted to do. Like from the very beginning, I was emphatic. There was never going to be photographs in this book. There was never going to be literal, unabstracted examples in the book. And I knew it wanted to have line drawings. And so there was something about Patrick Vale's style, which was like he could have the detail of a scientific drawer, but also had this way of expanding out and being and like making it more and more abstract. And it fit us perfectly. And so he would go through and illustrate more than we had asked for to make things clear. And then Raphael Geroni, who designed it, the layout and put it all together and did the cover. Again, like these were not things like we had some ideas, and Kurt had a ton of ideas, and we talked them all out. But there was all these different constraints and things we had to consider, and Raphael was able to sort of combine them all and turn them into something. This is not the book that I had in my head at all. Like they just presented like cool iterations of it, and I was just like, it blew me away, you know.
Well, even just the language of the design elements of a book, like the publisher would use words that I had to Google. I'm like, I don't know what is paper over board? I don't know what that means. And Raphael was just fluent in that language. Like he knew from having worked on books, you know, how many colors can you have? Like, what does it change if you do or don't have color, have different amounts of color? What are the different ways that you could put a book together, that you could bind it? And having somebody who has just been through that experience was invaluable.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, it is. It's surprising. Like in any design field, you discover that there is just a tremendous amount of very specific knowledge to that. I used to assume, like, you assume that designing a book is easy because it's just like it's a bunch of words and page numbers and like that's it. But man, it's very easy to do it badly. Like I have no idea how to do it well. Like I've tried and I can't make it look good.
Well,
amazing.
Tell me this, because I'm going to ask you a question, because it seemed like your two novels, the sequel and the original and the sequel had a design language that was shared, and they seemed like it was natural that the second one came after the first one. Did you have that in mind, that it could be iterated and the colors could be changed and that sort of thing, or was that
yeah, the cover design, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, we were looking for it because we knew it was going to have a sequel from the beginning, and we're looking for something. But I think that oftentimes, you know, it's surprising how easy it is to do that. How to take a design and make something that shares a design language but looks very different. And I love series covers. It's one of my favorite things, is to see how people like make a thing that looks the same but looks very different.
Yeah.
And
they trick me. Like I see that the new design of a Stephen King book, and I'm like, oh, I feel like I do need that. You know, like, so like they're doing their job. You know, yeah. Do you have any more audience questions?
Yeah, I do. I have a great one up here that I loved. Oh gosh, well, there is a bunch of them. There's so many questions. I guess I'll have to search for it. There's no way of searching. I'll find it. I want to ask you this question first, and then I'll find it. This is from Corinne, who asks, do you think we're more prone to notice the beauty of the natural world and therefore taking the beauty of cities for granted?
I think we are wired to notice a type of ostentatious human design, you know, like a beautiful building, a Victorian Beaux-Arts Capitol building. I think we get that pretty naturally. I think what we need to prime people for is the more everyday utilitarian design, and some people are like prone to that. Like in San Francisco, for example, like I think that Sutro Tower is a beautiful object. It's a large, radio antenna that it has like lots of angles, and it's red and white, and I think it's gorgeous. But people thought that was a blight when it was erected on Twin Peaks. And so I do think yeah, we're absolutely wired to appreciate beauty in nature, and I think that there are some beautiful forms that humans make, which are kind of naturally line with all that sort of stuff. But we do have to expand to sort of, if you there's some attention and maybe some learning that goes into you appreciating like Boston City Hall, for example.
Yeah, although I would say when you look up when you like get up close to a concrete building, even if brutalism doesn't naturally sit well with you, you get up close and you see the aggregate and you see the details and like the way it's put together. I would argue it's again a matter of like once you understand like what the thing is doing, you will start to find it beautiful. And the place where I went to architecture school had these huge cantilevered staircases that went across the atrium. And at first I was like, this is kind of a dull building. But I thought about like the span of those stairs, and the more I thought about it, the more I just thought, this really is beautiful. But it is it's less sunset and birds chirping. And it's more like it's like certain kinds of art, right? Where you have to have a bit of context to really appreciate a piece.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, what I take away from a lot of this is that the human part of it is that like none of this stuff just existed. Like this was all made by people to achieve a goal. And that goal is to serve you, is to make something for you. And that might not be something that's like you want to stare at for a long time. Maybe it's something that you want to use to get to the second floor. So Sarah reminded me of a thing that when I don't like asking people what they do at parties, because they're just like, oh God, now we're talking about work immediately. And like that, I do that enough. So I like this icebreaker question, and I had forgotten it, but I talked about it on my podcast like 2 years ago. What's your favorite bridge?
I mean, the problem is
it's going to be extra hard for you.
It's the Golden. Well, no, it's the Golden Gate.
I think it's really good.
I mean, I think it's probably the greatest human-made structure, actually.
Yeah.
Like I mean, I love it so much that, and I'll tell you one of the reasons why I love it, just to contrast it with something maybe more interesting. The Bay Bridge, the western span of the eastern span of the Bay Bridge is also quite lovely. It's the new one that has a central suspension part, and but it doesn't look great from the side. It's really great to drive over. You feel how tall it is. You feel kind of how overwhelming it is. You see the lines going over you. It's really lovely. The Golden Gate Bridge works no matter where you are. You can be looking at it from the side. You can be driving over it. When you go through the Robin Williams Tunnel and you see it for the first time, it blows you away. If you're down at Cavallo Point and you see it from below, it's amazing. Like every approach, every use of that bridge is gorgeous. And I do not know how they do it, because most bridges are not like that.
So
the fact
I have a favorite.
It has a built-in reveal in the tunnel where you're like, you don't see it, and then you're like, there it is.
It's like stunning. It's so
magic trick.
Yeah. What's yours, Kurt?
I have a favorite bridge story that is from Chicago. Okay. So I'm gonna go with that. But I do love the bridges that raise and lower downtown. I think they're really neat. And the story though is that there was a guy who figured out a way to get up inside, like underneath the bridge, like in the framework beneath where cars drive. And then he started moving in like furniture and like a television, and he just lived there. And this is a bridge that goes up and down. So when that happens, his house would go up and down. And eventually they found and evicted him. But I just thought, talk about noticing things, right? Here's somebody who is like, I wonder if I could climb up and live in that bridge. And I just love it.
We had a man who lived in between the floors of our office building for a while that we didn't know about, and then found out about. It was pretty wild.
That is very, very wild. I don't know. That doesn't sound quite as fun.
Yeah, this
No.
reminds me of a creepy criminal episode, actually.
Yeah.
Criminal podcast episode.
Yep. It all turned out fine. This question is from Jennifer, which is the one that I was trying to find before because it's adorable. My civil engineer and road designer mother made me get out of the car to see the largest precast box culvert in South Dakota. I felt like I became Roman Mars during that.
Oh my God.
Who was your favorite pointer outer of things that you have met? I love a pointer outer. It's absolutely true. There's people who are like, I know a thing, this thing.
Right. I don't know if I have a sort of like a formative one in like in my past life. I mean, right now my partner Joy is one of those people like who just loves the world in a way that I'm like is kind of new to me, like, and so like she's that for me at this point. But I didn't have one of those as a kid. Like I really had to develop this muscle on my own, and I maybe reinvented the wheel with like in the process of me becoming the person that pays attention to those things. I'm sort of an autodidact in that regard. I don't know, Kurt, you have like your parents are really engaged with the world, it seems, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, having academic parents who talk shop at the table was really boring at first, really great in hindsight. So one of them studied history and English, one of them studied math and physics. They're both professors, so they kind of have all the bases covered. And so they taught me to be interested in the world, in the history of the world, and I love them so much. I have so much respect for them, and they're like two of my greatest inspirations. I also have a cheap answer, which may sound like may sound fake, but it's real. Roman Mars.
Oh,
yeah.
Roman Mars. I mean, really, when I discovered 99pi, it was pretty early on. It was in the first couple of years. I was just like, this was made for me. Like this, like I was writing about design in kind of a similar way. But here was Roman just like telling these stories and getting me to pay attention to things. And I was just blown away. So I was a super fan for years before I joined the show.
Wow, I like that question.
Yeah. The process of like discovering 99% Invisible well into its existence, meaning that you have like a huge backlog of content that you just get to have an episode you've never heard whenever you want. It always makes me, people are like, sometimes I want to like learn about a new podcast and then I'm like, but I haven't even listened to every 99pi yet. So like, why would I, why are people still making podcasts?
Exactly.
This question is from Luis, who asks, in the process of writing a book, did you find out things about publishing and creating books that were similarly interesting as you as observers of the world are always discovering new interesting things?
I mean, both I think our agent and our editor, maybe some other people, have said to us that they've never met anybody like as interested in the process of making the book as us. And I don't know if that's totally a compliment, right? Like maybe I don't know if they love us looking over their shoulders like that, but we just have questions about everything. So yeah, like part of the joy of the book was learning how to make a book, and I've learned a lot.
Yeah, I mean, stuff about the size of the book, how it was printed, like I had intended to go to the printer, to go to all these things and document it before everything got shut down. But we turned in the book, I think just like 20 seconds before quarantine started, and so like, so after that, I just couldn't do it. But that was my intention, was to just go to Italy and see it printed. I think it was actually printed in Indiana, but like they told me at some point that maybe there would be a print in Italy, and I was like, sure, I'll go. And then I learned a ton of stuff, like the dimensions of it. They were like, you can't go too crazy with the dimensions because it won't be put in stores properly. You know, things like that. It was super fascinating.
Yeah, and I would say too, I mean, they're just like, there's all these little things, and not to too hard plug the website, but I've been writing all these articles too along the way, and I have some more coming out yet too that just talk about different aspects of the process, like the illustration process. I talked to Raphael about the design process, and that's not coming out for a few weeks, but like it's got pictures from like every stage, and I don't know, I love documenting that kind of thing. Like I love finding out and exploring like the processes of things. So it wasn't work for me. It was just like I naturally wanted to document it all.
Mm-hmm. This question is from Shamim, who asks, is there, and I've always been curious about this myself, is there a story behind the 99% invisible logo?
Okay, I think I heard you say, is there a story behind the 99% visible logo? You're cutting out a little bit for me, Hank. A fellow named Stephen Lawrence, who was referred to me by Jesse Thorne, he designed the logo. I hadn't really thought about he was the one who figured out the grid and the idea that one of the squares would be yellow. Although his original design was that the final square, the lower right-hand corner would be the yellow square, and I wanted it somewhere, like more random, I guess you might say. And so that is the story of the logo. Although it's been, like it has every once in a while this, because the font chosen is not regular inside of a grid. Some designers they're like, maybe you should pick a different font or do something, do something a little bit different. But it is it is what it is. I mean, I always say, you dance with the girl who brung you, and so maybe there's some room to update it someday. But right now, I'm pretty happy with it. And one of the things I was really happy about in terms of the book was that I think I was a little sheepish to to carry over the design language of the book. Or of the show to the book. I just wanted to make sure it had a really good reason for doing it. I didn't want just to impose upon it for the sake of branding and co-branding and stuff like that. But Raphael naturally kind of took to it and married all of these ideas into the book. So
yeah, and then the typography too. I mean, it's like he was like, of course I used the font from the logo, and then I just worked around that.
Yeah, no,
he just kind of had a natural instinct for it.
I was surprised by that, because I thought that he might find that to be too big of a constraint to kind of deal with, and I was really ready to let it go, because I'm a big believer in design in the broad sense that you make a thing to serve the purpose of that thing, of that format. And so if it didn't, if the typography didn't serve it well, then I was okay with it,
Yeah, and we do get hints of that 99PI logo on these intro pages to chapters, where it's sort of there's one spot in the grid which is a see-through
to the other side.
Yeah, so it kind of zooms you in on a detail of the previous page's illustration, which is a nice way of again drawing your attention and getting you to notice something about it.
Yeah. Hey, Hank.
Hi.
we should elect whomever in Montana is running that is going to make your internet better.
Yeah, that would be Governor Steve Bullock.
I think so. I think Steve Bullock would be the guy to do it. Okay. So we have 5 minutes left. Do you have one more question or something like that?
Yeah. I am always curious about creative journeys, and I think that y'all have had a really interesting one. At a number of times in your careers, you have had to decide whether or not to keep making your thing bigger and better, and you have continued to decide to do that, and to do more things, to take on more things. And I'm wondering, sort of do you feel that as an opportunity or an obligation, or just the default?
I mean, I think it's an opportunity a lot of the time. I think it's inertia some of the time. And I think it is required to be inertia some of the time, because you can't just like push something forward because of your like will all the time. You kind of like sometimes just have to, you know, you have to do it. And in a way, I kind of have to do things now because, you know, we have a team of people and I want to keep them having good jobs. And, you know, so you can keep doing that way too. But what also happens in that process is, you know, people come on like, you know, Kurt, like the book project could not exist without Kurt, like in any way, you know, like, and so like those creative opportunities that come out that keep it interesting, it really is important to the evolution of things. And like certainly 99PI as it existed in 2010 would not exist today if it was just running on my own power. I would have figured out some way to do something else. But it was the evolution of it and adding collaborators that made it go to where it is now, for sure.
And I'll speak from the position of somebody who I did sunset my kind of main project at one point that I had been working on before I joined 99PI, and eventually it just became too much. It became sort of a side project, and then I shut down this web publication I'd worked on for a long time. And I realized one day it had gone from being like a thing I had enjoyed to a thing that was just a burden. And the thing that I was enjoying and like was 99% visible. And so for me, it was a very intentional leap to like join this show and work on this book. And like this was like a set of decisions about priorities of what I wanted to work on creatively and who I wanted to work with.
Well, I'm glad that you guys found each other and that you made such a beautiful thing. And I'm glad that the Chicago Humanities Festival has had us here to chat. It's a really great conversation, even though I was not here for moments of it. And thank you, Roman, and thank you, Kurt, and thank you to the Bank of America as well, who I hear is our sponsor. And I think that someone else will probably take over now, and there will be a meet and greet for some people.
Thank you so much, Hank. I really appreciate
thanks.
you jumping in and doing this for us. That's so kind of you.
Yeah.
Cool. Good night, everybody.